Video technology has been one of the main technologies that enable contemporary surveillance practices over the last 5 decades. Video makes it possible to monitor events remotely, and since the invention of the VCR, to do so retrospectively and not just at the time the events take place. To date, video surveillance has been used in a large and growing variety of ways, both overtly and covertly, and consequently, its use produces a variety of intended and unintended effects. Video surveillance has a special place within surveillance studies, and it touches on the general fascination of people with surveillance. One of the reasons is undoubtedly the video camera, which is a physical product that is essential to every instance of video surveillance. Most other forms of surveillance have no such physical embodiment, and certainly not one that is so widespread that anybody can recognize. In fact, the image of the video camera is so iconic that it became a synonym for the idea of surveillance, and hardly any publication about surveillance can avoid it. Another reason for this special place within surveillance studies has to do with the power of the image in our society. Images enjoy a superior status in modern society and are perceived as credible representation of reality, a status that is also anchored in law, with images considered to be especially robust evidence. It is also anchored in sayings such as "seeing is believing," which convey our deep belief that we understand reality directly via images. Video, on its part, is even better than still images, since it depicts a sequence of events rather than a snapshot. Two examples of video-driven surveillance applications are CCTV cameras and empowering surveillance videos made by lay people. While similar in some ways, they differ in several respects. For example, historically, CCTV systems have been around for many decades now, while surveillance video shot by lay people have become widespread hand in hand with the growing popularity of smartphones. Moreover, while major CCTV systems are almost always implemented by large organizations and target ordinary people, user surveillance videos are the exact reverse. They are initiated and carried out by lay people and usually target agents of powerful organizations. The history of the closed-circuit TV, or CCTV as we all call it, dates back to the middle of the 20th century. As early as the 1950s, CCTV began to be used to assist policing, and by the 1960s, the retail sector was marketing it to private businesses to deter and apprehend shoplifters. The UK has undoubtedly been the trailblazer in the application of CCTV in both private and public spaces, and to date still accounts for the highest ratio of CCTV cameras per citizen. This is thanks, among other things, to heavy subsidizing of such CCTV systems by government. So how do CCTV systems work? Technically, a CCTV system consists of one or more cameras that in most cases are placed in plain sight and are connected either by cable or wirelessly to a control center where the camera feeds can be observed and recorded. In small-scale operations, such as a bodega, this center may be just a computer in a back room. And in large-scale operations, this may be a central control room with dedicated personnel who track the monitors 24/7. Furthermore, when there is a dedicated control room, it can either be situated in close proximity to the observed area or as far away as another continent. Historically, CCTV was framed as a tool for fighting crime. The idea is that cameras will either deter people from committing a crime, stop them as they commit a crime, or retrospectively help to identify them after a crime has been committed. Indeed, it is the fear of being identified and even apprehended in real time which is supposed to produce the said deterrence, and is the reason why most CCTV cameras are kept in plain view. For scholars of surveillance, this use of CCTV strongly primes Bentham's idea of the panopticon, on which Foucault expanded. However, since a separate video will be dedicated to the topic of the panopticon, here the discussion will only focus on Foucault's idea regarding the effects of being constantly observed. The idea Foucault puts forth in his book Discipline and Punish is that being constantly observed by an authoritative power produces obedient behavior and ultimately leads to the internalization of such proper behavior. While Foucault did not talk about CCTV technology, making the jump from the panopticon is very easy and conjures up the image of our entire society becoming one huge panopticon in which people are observed wherever they go and pushed into obedience. Yet does being observed in fact push people to behave compliantly? Put in CCTV terms, we may ask, does CCTV indeed reduce crime, as its promoters claim? Taken together, the studies done in the last few decades have not found a significant robust effect of cameras on reducing crime. Most of the studies that did find an effect showed a modest one that was limited to specific settings. Some studies have shown that instead of reducing crime, CCTV cameras shifted crime to locations that are not covered by the camera, a process called displacement. Scholars also noted that the crimes being prevented were mostly those typical of the lower social classes, such as shoplifting, loitering, and antisocial behavior. In any case, the debate over the effectiveness of CCTV in preventing crime is ongoing. Other effects that CCTV cameras have are creating a feeling of safety, the surveillance of people and objects for non-security motivations, and the disproportionate scrutiny of people from certain marginalized groups. With regards to subjective feeling of safety, indeed, many studies report that CCTV cameras produce this effect among people who pass through covered areas. And this feeling may also be the strongest motivation behind many of the organizations that fund CCTV systems, stronger even than the actual crime reduction motivation. With regards to non-security uses, CCTV has been used to track workers, vehicles, attractive or weird-looking passers-by, and an assortment of other living or inanimate objects. With regards to disproportionate scrutiny, studies have consistently observed that CCTV operators discern a propensity for crime based on their own predispositions about social groups. For instance, black young men are often the target of these operators' surveillance and as such are subject to the harassment that follows from it. Homeless people are often similarly targeted. Moving on to our second case study, that of empowering video surveillance, here again we have a form of surveillance that is overt most of the time. It consists of ordinary people taking out their cellular phone, pointing the camera at some wrongdoing, and recording it in order to disseminate it for the greater public to see. Two of its advantages over CCTV is the camera's mobility and thus ability to follow an unfolding event, and its ability to capture sound, which CCTV usually either lacks or has, but it renders ineffective by the distance between the camera and the events being videoed. Another difference is that the person recording the empowering surveillance video is exposed to the events and may be the target of threats, violence, and other forms of retaliations. By contrast, CCTV cameras are at most exposed to potential vandalism, while the operators are sheltered. The historical roots of empowering video surveillance go back to 1991 and the Rodney King incident, in which an African-American motorist was severely beaten by several officers of the Los Angeles police. This incident was caught on video camera and found its way to national media. This famous video, seen all across the globe, inspired activists and members of marginalized groups to use video in order to combat wrongdoings by members of strong social groups and predominantly by agents of powerful organizations such as the police. Once inspired, certain advocacy groups began promoting and facilitating empowering video surveillance. In the US, certain African American organizations have set cop watch practices in which a small group of activists walk the street when often patrolled by the police in order to deter officers' transgressions and to capture any misbehavior perpetrated by police officers. A continent away, an Israeli human rights NGO called B'Tselem ran a project named Shooting Back, in which it gave Palestinians in the occupied territories video cameras in order to record transgressions by Israeli security forces and by Jewish settlers. These projects and others like them were part of a temporary phase that lasted from the moment of inspiration triggered by the Rodney King incident until the proliferation of smartphones. During this temporary phase, people needed standalone cameras in order to record empowering surveillance videos. This, of course, severely limited the applicability of this method. Yet once cellular phones with cameras became widespread, empowering video surveillance began to be much more commonplace and much less top-organized. Indeed, since the mid-2000s, there is a constant flow of empowering surveillance videos appearing both in traditional media and on internet platforms such as YouTube and Facebook. As in the case of CCTV, in the case of empowering video surveillance as well, one of the most important questions is, how effective is it? Does it achieve the desired effect? The desired effect of empowering surveillance is, of course, to stop transgressions. This may be stopping police violence against marginalized groups, stopping unlawful behavior by certain individuals or certain groups, or stopping certain unlawful practices by large organizations, such as dumping pollutants into a river. The desired effect may also be to punish the perpetrators in order to deter future transgressions and to facilitate the compensation of damaged parties. Cumulatively, what scholars of video empowering surveillance found is that the ability to translate these videos into the desired effect is extremely limited. Members of powerful organizations are not easily deterred and often try to stop the videotaping from taking place or to suppress the video somehow rather than stop the transgressions. Scholars and activists also found that both the authorities and the public are reluctant to exact punishment for some transgressions done against certain social groups, even though they are clearly visible on the video. Holding back punishment this way sends a detrimental message to agents of powerful organizations that they can operate with impunity. This is not to say video of empowering surveillance have had no effect whatsoever. Those videos that display the most obviously egregious acts of criminality often did help social advocates attain indictments and some sanctions against the perpetrators. Moreover, in certain settings such as protests, video of wrongdoing may serve as bargaining chips in order to release social activists being detained. These are, of course, a far cry from any hope for structural change. All in all, we see that video surveillance is much less powerful than it at first seems, and that translating the surveillance into the desired effect is hard. Still, the human belief in the power of the image is so high that it pushes people to try to harness the video surveillance beast again and again.